Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight,
it's not a priority for the CTA.
Southside Red Line commuters are left without a spot because of park and ride disparities. Controversy and concern as the Chicago Police Department attempts to bring back a system that would track residents that are believed to be gang members. A South suburb in hot water, or lack thereof, why Robbins, Illinois is seeing water supply issues and what its mayor hopes to do about it. And two Chicago architecture critics team up to ask the question, who is this city for, in their latest book. All that's coming up, but our first story tonight, questions and concerns over Chicago's gang database system. It's right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Chicago Police Department officials are attempting to bring back a system that would track Chicagoans they believe to be members of gangs. But it is not without controversy and some pushback. That's because the city's inspector general criticized the CPD's last gang database as being riddled with errors, ripe for abuse, and disproportionately targeting Black and Latino Chicagoans. Joining us now are Artenice Myrick, lead Chicago organizer at Live Free Chicago, Chico Tillman, executive director of Ready Chicago, and Geneva Brown, teaching professor at DePaul University's Department of Criminology. We also reached out to the Chicago Police Department to join us for this discussion, but they did not respond for this. They did, however, give us a statement late last month, which we will get to in a few minutes. Thanks to the three of you for joining us. Chico Tillman, let's start with you, please. What were your thoughts on the old database and how it was used by police?
The challenges I had with the old database is some of the errors that were involved were individuals were listed that were actually dead. So not only was it antiquated based upon the information that was in it, it was incorrect because some of the individuals that were labeled gang members were indeed individuals who had went through the penal system but actually had been rehabilitated and had been living positive pro-social lifestyles, and now they're being targeted for things they've done in their past. And that's where it can become problematic in our communities.
Geneva Brown, you attended a community panel about 3 years ago about the old database. What were some of the concerns that people had then?
Pretty much what Chico had mentioned, that you have people who are deceased on the database, you have people who are actually not gang members, you have duplicate names, so identification were issues. And frankly, just the idea that, you know, people are innocent until proven guilty. Constitution is supposed to be a shield to protect and uphold people's rights. Unfortunately, it looks like that does not necessarily count when it comes to the database. We do have databases. We maintain them for sex offenders, violent offenders, but now for gang affiliation, there's a whole different category that we're creating that is very problematic.
Artenice Myrick, you've seen firsthand how the database affects community members. Any examples spring to mind?
I spent time interning as a mitigation specialist with the Federal Public Defender's Office, and I remember an individual was just pictured with some young community members, and this photo was used to say that they were affiliated with the gang, and it turned out it wasn't true. And if this had gone on much longer than we wanted, then that individual would have had longer sentencing, right, which would have impacted his life just heavily, right? And so that's the thing about the database, is that it has widespread inaccuracies, and it's not really on misconduct, in terms of misconduct, it's more centered on what someone looks like, right? And that doesn't bring accurate information to show that it's effective in making sure that the individuals that they're claiming that they're getting on this database are actually held to be true.
Chico Tillman, are gangs a significant enough driver of crime in Chicago that the police could make the case that this sort of database is necessary for them to do their jobs?
If you think about most of the crimes, and particularly violent crimes occur because of interpersonal conflict, not because of association with a particular group or a social norm. It's two individuals that may have a problem and don't have problem-solving skills in a way to resolve it in a positive way. So creating a database only targets individuals from a particular class of people and puts them in a particular situation where they might be criminalized for just living in a particular area. Because almost everyone that was in the gang database book lived in socioeconomic challenged neighborhoods. So it's criminalizing people for where they grow up, where they live, and who their neighbors, friends, and family members are.
And just for clarity, how would police use this database? Like if there's a name of a person they come in contact with, run the name in the database, it comes up affiliated with X gang.
One of the ways they could use it is a law that most people don't talk about, which is conspiracy. Conspiracy is knowing or being associated with or related to an individual that commits a crime, and it allows you to group individuals together for one crime as opposed to the individual that actually committed the crime. So you can see individuals being incarcerated at high levels just for being associated with another group of individuals. And we've seen that since 1994, not only at the federal level, but at the state level in Chicago, they have been doing acts which we call RICO, taking groups of individuals and incarcerating them at a time to try to mitigate some of the challenges we're having in our city.
Geneva Brown, how common is the use of databases and data collection by police?
It's very common. If you are a felon, it is expected that you will turn over your DNA into a DNA database. If you are a sex offender, you will also be part of a database. We have multiple databases here in Illinois. However, those are for people who are guilty. There are people who have been through the system. Even people in databases who have been found to be wrongfully convicted are having a hard time getting their names out of the database. So I'm just curious as to what the nexus is between gathering the data for the gang database and also how this will reduce crime. I haven't seen anything that would explain that. My other issue is with the rate of gang activity we have going on the south and west sides with the micro gangs that we call mobs now that are small and operate in very, very small geographic areas. The database that we have, is it going to be some outdated function, and are they keeping up with technology? If they are they going to be surveying people to see if there's still gang activity? There are more questions to me than I am comfortable with.
Ardenise Myrick, the police have said one reason they need this sort of resource is to notify people who might be at risk of retaliation from gang members. Does that concern you at all? Should this database just go away?
I believe that the database should go away. I don't believe that it actually shows efficacy in terms of reducing crime, preventing violence, or actually keeping communities safe. I also believe that the database, in terms of just stopping retaliation, right? I think we need to start looking at investment, right? We don't need to look at the after the fact matters, because I think with Chicago CPD in particular, they have low clearance rates to begin with. And so how do we begin on fixing those? And then how do we begin to see how can we fund peace on the front end rather than on responsive kind of levels rather than proactive levels.
Now, as we mentioned, CPD spokesperson did give a statement to WTTW about this. The statement reads, quote, "The Chicago Police Department has been diligently working to finalize and launch the Criminal Enterprise Information System, CEIS. This required extensive vetting of previously collected gang data to ensure all information being inputted into the CEIS is accurate according to the new, more robust set of criteria." CPD says that they have a new system that'll purge inactive profiles from the list, tightening up how a person is deemed gang affiliated and offering a way for people to appeal their inclusion on the list. You know, Chico Tillman, before we run out of time, do you think these protocols are enough to change your opinion at all?
Not at all. When you think about what our city is going through, we need something that would allow us to address the root causes of violence and the root causes of crime in our communities, which is lack of disinvestment and a lack of resources. Other ways to combat it is just a
Sorry, I know you've got a tickle in your throat. We'll get you some water.
A militaristic way to address communities that suffer from structural violence for decades, and that's not the answer. Another thing I want to say, as my colleague spoke about earlier, with many of the gangs already being deconstructed, how can we identify who's associated with a gang or who's not? Because the structure of gangs that we knew in the 70s and 80s and 90s no longer exists.
Doesn't exist the way they used to exist anymore. That's where we'll have to leave it. Thanks to the three of you for joining us, Chico Tillman, Geneva Brown, and Artenise Myrick. Thank you. And of course, public comment for CPD's gang database system draft policy will close on December 3rd. You can find more information about that on our website. About 3 out of every 4 park and ride spaces at CTA stations are on the north and west sides of Chicago. That's according to the CTA's own numbers. For those who live and ride the trains on the south side, options are fewer. That leaves some commuters facing a difficult decision: park illegally, risking a ticket or a tow, or having to drive all the way downtown. Carol Marine and students from DePaul University's Center for Journalism Integrity and Excellence have been looking into this issue.
On a recent morning, the Dan Ryan jammed with inbound traffic, Alma Raindis Burton was dropped off outside the Red Line station at 95th and the Dan Ryan.
If you could, would you park here?
True, definitely.
Has there ever been parking here?
Never. Not since I've been coming around here, no.
So how long have you been coming around here?
Forever.
The 95th Street station is the first chance for Southsiders to hop a train downtown.
Do you wish you could park and ride here?
Sure, yes, I would. It's kind of difficult.
Marvin Howard says he's been using this station for 30 years.
So you've never had parking?
Never.
It's no laughing matter, said 9th Ward Alderman Anthony Beal.
We know what explains that. This is in the heart of the African American community, where resources have been neglected, and it's not a priority for the CTA.
There are 18 CTA park and ride lots in Chicago, including lots for the Blue Line running from O'Hare to Forest Park and the Orange Line from downtown to Midway. At the Howard Street station, at the far north end of the Red Line, CTA riders can choose from 592 spaces to easily park, walk, and catch a train. From Howard Street,
this is a Red Line train to 95th.
The Red Line travels 21 miles through Lincoln Park, into the subway, through downtown, ending up at 95th Street. Along that line, from the north side to the south side, there is not a single other park and ride lot. In 2019, the CTA completed a $280 million overhaul of the station at 95th Street. Buses ferry passengers in and out, while the few public spots on the street are quickly taken. Try and park a few blocks away, and a tow zone may be your only alternative.
I come in and I often park near 87th Street, and I know exactly where I can park after 11 a.m. so I don't go illegal, but you find yourself risking it.
Joe Schwederman, a regular Red Line rider, is a DePaul University professor and a nationally known specialist on public policy and transportation.
There are equity issues here, and I think what's driving the inequity in some ways is the Blue Line extension to O'Hare. Just excellent large parking facilities there, and a comparable effort wasn't made south to upgrade those lines to give the folks in those neighborhoods those kind of park and ride access.
Schwederman says the scarcity of parking indicates a citywide lack of emphasis on transit parking options.
I think perhaps the biggest disappointment is we have one of the busiest rapid transit lines in the country, which is the Red Line, which everybody knows and uses, but we don't have sort of a well-placed system of park and rides.
The lots the CTA has, Schwederman says, pale in comparison to more modern ones in other cities.
Like the new line in Washington Dulles Airport, new stations built with decks, entrance ramps, and right off expressways. And that's becoming the state of the practice.
Of major U.S. cities, Chicago ranks 8 out of 9 in park and ride spots per rail rider based on the available data. For instance, figures show Boston has 100 park and ride lots compared to Chicago with just 18. And in Washington, D.C., that city has 10 times the number of park and ride spaces as does Chicago's CTA. The CTA did not agree to an on-camera interview. Instead, writing in an email, most, quote, park and ride lots are below capacity. And, quote, the goal is to get people out of automobiles, which is why CTA and every other U.S. transit system doesn't build many parking lots, save for those on the outer edges of the system. There is one more issue we found when it comes to the possibility of park and ride at 95th Street.
This is an empty lot across the street, you see it? Yeah, they should make it a parking lot. It'd be more convenient for people to park. I think so.
Where a parking lot would be great at like the 95th Street terminal or something like that. That's a perfect spot for one.
But you don't see one?
No. Even after all the construction and the rebeautification of it, they still didn't build one.
Take a ride on Google Earth and you will see adjacent to the end of the line at 95th Street 2 vacant lots. Those empty lots, according to a frustrated Alderman Beal, are owned by the CTA.
CTA has already purchased all these lots. They have cleared them out, and they're the ones that's leaving them sitting vacant today.
Wrought iron fencing, accompanied by weeds, surrounds both lots.
This park and ride can be done in a matter of weeks. It's already been excavated. It's already ready to go. The land has been cleared. Give the people some place to park so they can park their car, get on CTA, and get to work in a timely manner.
Again, that was Carol Marine with reporting from students at DePaul's Center for Journalism Integrity and Excellence. Alderman Beal acknowledges the zoning would have to change for those two lots, but he says if the CTA wants to build a park and ride there, he will wholeheartedly support it. And I want a quick correction from earlier. I said that the public comment period for the police department's gang database closes on December 3rd. That's wrong. It is December 7th. Public comment is open until December 7th. Up next, suburban water woes. Stay with us. The village of Robbins is one of the oldest African-American suburbs in Chicago, founded in 1917. And over Thanksgiving week, hundreds of residents there were left without water. But that was just one out of 23 water main breaks the south suburb has experienced since the beginning of the year. The issue stems from long overdue repairs on a decades-old water system. We spoke with the mayor of Robbins and a village trustee about what they hope leaders and residents can do about the issue.
Well, the first sustainable issue is to keep the water on, right? So whenever there's a water main break, we call Calumet City Plumbing to come out here and rectify the problem. The long-term solution is going to need some help from the Congress and from federal and the state help as far as a $40 million projected project that can completely revamp our water infrastructure, from the water tower to the water meters to the water pump. So it's a complete total project.
It's incomprehensible to even know and remember that on this Thanksgiving, we had residents that had no water. They could not shower, they could not flush their toilets, they could not cook their food, and so we're calling on our citizens to help us call upon our state representatives, legislators, and members of Congress. We need everybody. This is bigger than just a Robbins issue.
Again, that was Village of Robbins trustee Tiffany Robinson and Mayor Darren Bryant. Mayor Bryant says he and Congressman Bobby Rush expect to meet with the EPA in about 2 weeks to discuss the future of the South suburban water systems. There are more details on our website. What do you get when you put two of Chicago's preeminent architecture critics together? A thought-provoking book about Chicago's storied architecture and how it has or hasn't helped build a more unified and equitable city. It's called Who Is This City For? Architecture, Equity, and the Public Realm in Chicago. Paris Schutz recently spoke with the authors Blair Kamen, former Chicago Tribune architecture critic, and Lee Bay, architecture critic and editorial board member at the Chicago Sun-Times, who took photos in the book. Paris began by asking how the two came together to make this book.
Blair called me up, emailed me after assembling the columns, and said, would you mind taking photographs? And it was a great opportunity to kind of go through his columns for the last 10 years, and then figuring out a way as a photographer, not as a writer this time, but as a photographer, to sort of see the city as he saw it when he wrote about it, and then sort of put a kind of a spin on some of the images.
I want to get to an excerpt from the book, a very key excerpt. You write, quote, is this a good city, a just city? Absolutely not. Which prompts a second query. Can those responsible for building the city advance the fortunes of neighborhoods devastated by decades of discrimination, disinvestment, and deindustrialization? On that crucial matter, the jury is still out. So, Blair, how can architecture and planning improve the tale of two cities here in Chicago?
Well, I think we're seeing an attempt to do that right now by Mayor Lightfoot's administration. One of her signature programs, Invest Southwest, has amassed $2.2 billion in private and public investment in order to rebuild the commercial corridors of 10 community areas on the south and west sides. That's a very different strategy than the public investment that went into building the failed public housing projects like Cabrini Green and the Robert Taylor homes. The problem for Lightfoot is that these developments of hers in Invest Southwest are on paper right now. Construction hasn't started yet, but they do look good on paper, Paris. They're very intelligently assembled plans. They use good architects. They have a nice mix of modern and historic buildings. They mix uses to try to make lively and safe streets. So there's a lot of promise there. And, I think that her planning commissioner, Maurice Cox, really does deserve credit for pushing things forward in this very constructive way.
Right. So there's some projects in Austin, in Auburn, Gresham. Lee Bay, a crucial potential public space, or a space that has been a public space in the past, has been the bottom floor of the James R. Thompson Center. Now Google is purchasing it. Do you have high hopes here that Google can repurpose that space into a public space?
They certainly should, but the jury is still out. And I think that, the town's remaining architecture critic, which is me, will certainly be pushing for that. I mean, the beauty of saving that building, in addition to saving its historic exterior, is preserving that space on the inside. That's really where the building zooms. And, and the question is whether that'll be preserved. And in some way, we're hoping, yes, it should be. And how do you do that in the light of where we are security-wise? Before 9/11, before all the madness, you could walk into any lobby of any building in Chicago and look around. Now you can't do it as much. So is this building going to be locked down, or is it going to be open? If it's going to be open, how is it going to be open? All those are questions that have to be answered, but I think there's a point of view, yes, it should be open, that could be expressed.
And we know that you and others will keep the pressure on Google to make that happen. Blair, you write in the book about how projects on the south and west side aren't just beneficial for those neighborhoods, but for the entire city. For instance, the extension of the Red Line down to 130th. You've written a couple columns on that. But right now, older people are still not on board with providing any city funding for it. So what does that tell you about the political will here to engage in projects that close the gap between the haves and the have-nots?
Well, I think that in some cases, the aldermen are taking a very short-sighted and ultimately disingenuous perspective. They didn't have the same problem with using TIF funds to fund the Purple and Red Line modernization on the north side. But now, all of a sudden, it's the south side, and they've got some problems with it. I just find that despicable, honestly. I think that this is a huge project. As Lee has written in the Sun-Times, it's one of the most important urban design projects on the city's plate right now. It has all these potential benefits, not only for eliminating the transit desert on the far south side, but increasing the tax base, and improving air pollution problems, making the labor pool better for downtown employers. I mean, there are just enormous benefits that would accrue to the whole city. So the argument of the alderman is just utterly baseless in my view. And it's again, this gets to the core issue of the book. Who is the city for? Who gets what? Who gets treated fairly and who doesn't? And if this project doesn't go forward because of aldermanic short-sightedness, it will be a tragedy and a travesty for the city of Chicago.
All right, well, it's great to see both of you come together and write this book, two great minds on architecture, and we appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paris. Great to be here.
And again, the book is called Who is the City For? Architecture, Equity, and the Public Realm in Chicago. You can read an excerpt on our website. Back to wrap things up right after this.
And that's our show for this weekend. Join me and Paris Schutz next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.